welcome back to Compact Convos. Today we're going to be talking about natives, how to base them, how to paint them, and what their uses can be historically and what their equivalency would be. So let's start with the very first one. Is uh, when I think natives, I think of some melee, some tomahawks, some guys who are just in there getting it nitty gritty. How are we going to base those, Caleb? And what is their equivalent when it comes to their peers for the age of the musket?
Yeah, so in this, we're not really talking like tribe specific. We'll do that and hopefully a later faction specific video. So these are more generic. So we're talking perhaps Native American units or Native African or Native Indian units. So when we're talking about your run of the mill native base, you need to base these in loose order. They need to be spread out. These are not in nice, neat lines like the armies of Europe and some of the Western countries. These are going to be very well spread out. They're not really practicing formations as we truly know it. You can paint them on a whole bunch of different varieties. If it's like a certain tribe you're doing, you need to really do some research on tribal markings, maybe certain paint colors to distinguish them. But if you're just doing generic natives like how I do, I just put up a whole litany of colors. That way I can kind of say they're whatever tribe I want them to be. But you could really get into some detail about that. If we're talking about melee infantry specifically, I would say their counterpart to European armies would be line infantry in melee. So whereas the line infantry can shoot, these melee units are exactly what they are. They don't have really any range capabilities. So getting to the enemy is going to be the hard part. They're probably going to get shot up a little bit. But once they close in with the enemy, I would say either make them equal or maybe just a little better because that's all they do. All they do is melee. They don't have to worry about shooting.
Next one, very classic, cowboys and Indians type thing, is bowmen.
Oh yeah, bows. So bows are uniquely a native unit in our rule set. The bow needs to have, I would say, a reduced range in comparison to a musket, and most certainly a rifle. But in our rule set, a regular musket can shoot 6 inches, so we make the bow, it can loose at 4 inches. But the bow is unique in that it is the only weapon system in the rule set that gets to shoot twice a turn. So I believe it's either 4 to 6 or 5 to 6 gets a hit. But natives with bows can fire twice in any go, although they have a reduced range. Um, Bows, kind of think of these as the light infantry equivalent. And we've actually had to rework the native system a lot because with how detailed our games are starting to get, we have people that want to do maybe a specific native faction instead of just having it be like a little nuisance on the side. People are actually wanting to play a full-on native campaign, being a tribe. So we've really reworked it and added a lot of units. Bows being the light infantry, I would say they should be on peer with melee with light infantry. So I would say 5 to 6. So worse than melee infantry. Although these guys do still have some kind of melee weapon, and that's not their predominant function. So whatever their predominant function is, that's what they're going to be best at. And so bows being the best for them. These will also be loose order, like every other native unit. And please make sure that the unit you're using to base looks like what you're calling it. So if I call it a bow unit, but they all have spears, don't do that. All right. If it's labeled bowman, make sure you have bowman on the base.
Then you've already said it. What if about spearmen?
Yeah, so these spear units, they are going to maybe not be as good in, let's say, shorthand melee. So if you have two native tribes fighting, perhaps the guys with the tomahawks will fight better against the guys with the spears, right? Because they can get up and close and personal real easy. I would say spearmen should be equivalent to line infantry in melee combat. Line infantry basically have a spear, right? It's just a gun with a spear point on the front, the bayonet. So they could be pretty equivalent. Spear equipped infantry, though, should have a specific anti cavalry advantage. Um, However you want to interpret that is up to you. Remember, these natives are not trained in European anti-cavalry style formations. So you're not going to see Zulus forming square. You're not going to see the Iroquois Confederacy forming square whenever cavalry is charging at them. But maybe the spear helps level the playing field, because how we've normally done it is the reason how the United States fought the Native Americans is you're not seeing massive line infantry columns. Really, it's mainly cavalry in the 1800s because natives are having a hard time against cav. So maybe you could say that enemy cav has an advantage against native forces because native forces are in loose order. They don't compact like infantry armies of the European powers or even the United States. And so they have a disadvantage of that. But I would say if they have spears, maybe that negates that disadvantage. Now spears help level the playing field against Cav.
I completely agree. Is now this may be more of time pending, a native specific or Zulu specific. What about muskets or rifles or rifled muskets, I should say?
Yeah, so there's plenty of cases throughout history where native armies have either traded for firearms or they managed to capture them after a battle. Um, that's how the natives during the French and Indian War were able to get so many muskets, is because the French were trading it to them so they could fight the British. And whenever we, the United States, gained independence from Britain, Britain would be sending muskets to, Tecumseh, I believe was his name, um, in order to fight the United States during the War of 1812. So these, natives getting firearms is not out of the ordinary at all. However, these natives are not receiving the, crack discipline that, say, line infantry is, and they're still in loose order, right? So I would say it could be either or. You could say these are some really well trained natives trained by European advisors, and so therefore they can shoot like line infantry. Or it could be they've only shot the weapon once and now they're heading into battle with it. So it's really up to the umpire. How we play it is that native muskets, they normally just get a generic 5 to 6 to hit, so the same as militia, and also the same melee. So natives with muskets are more of a harassing thing. They do have um, same equivalent range as muskets, but these are far from your professional crack shots. Um, and they should also be treated more like militia, more of a nuisance than anything on the battlefield.
Okay, and then obviously when we're basing them, make sure they have the appropriate weapon and whatnots.
Mm,
Now,
yeah.
all these units can also be mounted. Let's just talk about the how to base them and I guess really their stat difference of them being mounted versus dismounted.
Yeah. So for the dismounted units, you'll want to base those about 25 men per base. So the line infantry from European armies, we do 40 men per base. For natives, you want to do about 25. They're loose. There's fewer of them. Moving to Cav, we generally base those the same as the European Cav, so 20 to 21 a base, as we mentioned in our earlier cavalry video. Melee Cav, um, Lancers specifically, and we've talked about Lancers before. Native Lancers are going to receive a bonus on their initial charge. Um, Native bows, that's honestly going to be very much of a nuisance because although the bow has a reduced range, now the Cav has that movement to be able to get out of enemy fire. So they can move in, loose their 2 arrows, and then move out, come in and do it again. And then we have musket natives. So if natives dismounted don't shoot too well on a stable platform, imagine natives riding a horse trying to fire a flintlock and they haven't received much training. So they are also going to receive a reduced penalty. Now we're just talking about the age of black powder, um, 16, 1700s. So this is when natives are first getting it. Now, if we start moving into like the Civil War period, the 1870s, natives have at this point become very much accustomed to firearms and they treat them very well. And they're in some cases like very good shots. But this earlier period, no, at least for our rule set.
No, no.
Um, the, the only bonus to being on Cav is that now these types of units are now mobile. That's the only real difference. Native factions in our game, for now, cannot form any kind of formations. We've talked about the Canterbury Circle, kind of thing about like the Mongols circling around an enemy with horses, but natives are not really using formations at all. Um, but there have been plenty of cases where I have a crack European force, very disciplined, and I'm always kind of shaky when it comes to the natives because there are times when they do really poorly, but there are also times if they do things just right, they can really mop the floor with you, especially when they start to get into melee range.
Is so my question too is if they're mounted, are we treating any mounted native kind of like a dragoon force almost? They can easily dismount, or are they like heavy cavalry, light cavalry? They're just staying mounted throughout the whole engagement.
No, that's an excellent question. I really think it's up to the umpire. Me personally, I would allow all of them to dismount because they are warriors just like the next one. It's not like you enlist and you're like, I specifically want to be a cavalryman and I sign a 4-year contract to be a cavalryman. Natives is like, hey, I'm normally really good with a tomahawk on the ground, but for this, I'm going to take a horse into it. Right? They're not. They of course train. They have training grounds, right? But it's far from our European Western mindset of what training in formations and discipline are for sure.
And then, speaking of discipline, let's go up to the next level. Our rule set, what we would consider like elite light infantry, elite infantry, since we're not doing anything faction specific, is we just got it called Braves. Those are the elite native troops for any of them melee, bowmen, musket, spearmen, mounted as well. How are we going to base those? What do their stat ranges look like? And after you answer that, I got one other question on it.
Yeah, so the Braves, or what we term the elite unit, you can kind of think of these as like the grenadiers of native armies. Um, Surely you can get some elite cavalry, but we're keeping things kind of generic. So that way it works for multiple different eras, for multiple different nations. Now, if you're playing like a faction specific game, the umpire could perhaps add or modify these units. But the Braves, um, their melee is a 3 to 6. And to keep in mind, regular line infantry is 4 to 6 in melee. Okay, so with that being said, the Braves need to be a bit more of a rare thing. These are the perhaps most experienced warriors of the tribe or of the village. And so these might be the elders, right? These guys have seen their fair share of battles, not like the youngins. So these guys are going to be few and far between. And if you're playing, this goes for any native faction. If you lose this Chiefs Braves, these are the village elders. These are the most experienced warriors. So once they die, replenishment is going to be extremely difficult. And once the unit's gone, I would say it's gone from that village. Like you could, that's it. So
Right.
I would think keep that in mind. So they are. You can kind of think these as your shock force, perhaps a reserve when things are starting to go south if you're playing as a native player, but definitely make them a bit more rare than your standard melee unit.
And then, can they swap weapons? So, for example, let's say they have muskets or bows, right? But since they're elite, they also, have their tomahawk, sword, knife, whatever they have as a melee weapon. Could they be experts in kind of two certain areas, like an expert bowman, musket, or expert in melee? Or is it just going to be you got to pick one and just roll with it?
I would say to keep it balanced, just picking one and rolling with it. It's really up to the umpire. If you're the most experienced warrior, you're like a village elder, like you've seen your fair share of battles and you've used a fair share of weapons, I'm sure. Um, Personally, to keep things balanced, it would suck if I had a unit being like, okay, I'm gonna go to my spear. Okay, now actually I'm going to musket, then I'm going to bow, then I'm going to my tomahawk. It'd be difficult to keep up with. But for balance purposes, I would definitely recommend if you're getting an elite unit of natives, you pick the weapon set that goes with it. And most of the time, I don't really give the players a choice. I'm just like, these are straight up like elite melee native units. I don't really say elite musket units or anything like that. Just to kind of keep the flair of the native faction.
Right. And then mounted braves, the chief's bodyguards, so to speak, which I guess braves could be too, but the chief's bodyguards. Um, how do we base those, and are there any differences in stats, or are they just going to be plussed up stats from just normal mounted natives?
Yeah, so the mounted braves, you could just consider this as like the heavy cavalry of the natives. I wouldn't say they can go toe to toe with like Napoleon's cuirassier or anything like that. But these should be better than your standard melee cav, however you want to work that. Um, and I normally, when I put those on a base, I put like headdresses on them, make them look maybe a lot more war paint, make them look very different on the battlefield. And just the same as the dismounted Braves, you want these to be far and few in between. These are your shock troops or your emergency reserve. That's really the only difference, and you can outfit them with whatever weapons as well. But just make sure to try to keep it balanced. I normally just make it once again just melee.
Then going in, as we talked about last video, we'll go into a bit more detail on the chief himself. What makes a chief different than a general staff?
Yeah,
And
excellent question.
yeah,
Very excellent question. The chief is going to be based the exact same as a general staff of Western armies, right? We're going to put 5 natives on the base, and boom, that's your commander. However, the difference doesn't really come in rule set, but more in origin and how it plays. So in native warfare, the chief would gather together a war band, and he's pretty much a representative of either that nation or that tribe or whatever you want to call it. And so kind of think of it as like the king himself leading his nation to war as a general. Whereas the generals of Western armies, they're really just taking orders from the king and they're going out there and exercising those orders. This is the leader of the nation himself moving out to lead the troops from the front. So, with that being said, there's more consequences on campaign if he dies. If we have a general from a Western army die in campaign, like, oh, that sucks, maybe there's a morale penalty. We have to wait for a replacement general. However, if the war chief dies, the leader of the war party of his nation, that nation might just instantly lead the conflict right off the bat. Like our Southern Colonies campaign, I was the British. I was working with the Chief Dragon Canoe, and we were working very closely with the natives. But Chief Dragon Canoe was killed in a battle against the Americans, and then suddenly the entire tribe that was half my force said, "Well, we're going home. Our war leader's dead." And so I'm over here in the backcountry, like, "Whoa! I just lost like 50% of my men because this one guy died." That's something to keep in mind. Whenever the war chief dies, and we see this historically, the resistance or the fight of that tribe peters out and basically disappears from the natives, and they normally leave. Very few of them choose to stick around and fight because they're much like how the men of European armies are enlisting to fight under a specific regimental commander. All these native units are coming with their war chief, their leader, and so seeing him die is a very massive morale blow. I would say even more so than a European general being killed in the field.
I completely agree. I mean, if we were to, war game medieval Europe, if the king dies, that would just take that whole faction out. That's essentially what
Yes.
these native chiefs were, because they're bringing a whole bunch of different tribes with different, wants, needs, desires together. And then the common factor was him and his leadership. General Washington, during the Rev War. If General Washington had died during the Rev War, America's probably not America. Um,
Hmm.
but other than that, anything that we could be missing for natives, or if we are, down in the comments section, let us know. Is we've just gone specifically for our home nation of America, but there's so many different native factions out there. There's the Zulus, the Boer Wars. That's where I've just drawn a blank at. Caleb, can you think of any other native factions?
You get natives like the Indian nations. like Mysore, some of the Mughal Empire. All of these are a
Oh
bit more
yes.
professional for you. They're not really natives. More, I'm thinking like just like non-Western army in a way
Yeah.
when I'm saying this. But yeah, absolutely. The only other thing I would say to keep in mind is when playing any native faction on campaign, the umpire needs to give that due diligence to that native player instead of focusing mainly on the European Eurocentric area because the natives are fighting in their backyard. So you need to give the natives scouting bonuses. You need to give them ambush bonuses. You need to give them reconnaissance or intelligence bonuses if the enemy is in their territory. So campaign wise, the natives, their numbers are going to be less. Their replenishment's going to be less. In some cases, their combat's going to be less. So give them the historic bonuses they had. I mean, they already have some of the odds stacked against them in technology and in doctrine. So go ahead and give them their historical bonuses. Let them travel faster on the campaign map than European armies. Kind of think of those bonuses whenever you're playing natives on campaign, and hopefully, eventually, we'll be able to do a faction specific video for natives in the American Revolution. Maybe different tribes and different councils.
Is yes. Once our, not to put a cart before a horse into everything, is once our Southern Colonies campaign gets done, we got the whole big group. The natives will be making an appearance in the Western Theater. I'm looking forward to it. But until then, thanks for stopping by.
That's it for today's episode. For battles, brushes, and everything in between, make sure you subscribe and join the community. Until next time, Generals, see you on the tabletop.